Hello everyone, we are from Group 1 and today we are going to present Chapter 2, which is Employment Income. So our group comprises of 5 members and myself, Vieeshzalee Bascaran, and my matric number is 264250. So these are the table of content that we are going to present here. So I will start with the first part, which is residence of individuals. So, residence of individuals under Section 7 Income Tax Act 1967 is defined as an individual resident in Malaysia for the basis of year of assessment as determined under Section 7 and subsection 71B of the Act. So, the resident status of an individual will determine whether such individual is liable of Malaysian income tax or not. So, determination of resident status generally, resident status for tax purpose is determined based on the number of physical presence of the individual, which is 182 days or more of that individual in Malaysia in a basis period for a year of assessment and not by his nationality or citizenship. So the cases here is DGIR versus Dr. Ahmad, and the next case is Ketua Pengarah Hasil Dalam Negeri versus Richard Allen Sonnet Eno. So I will talk about the second case. So the issue here is whether the taxpayers' absence from Malaysia from 19th of June 1992 till 2nd July 1992, which comprises of 14 days, could be taken into account to form a part of the 182 or more days under the Section 71B Income Tax Act 1967. So it was held that it was a summer vacation where temporary absence for 14 days must be in respect of social visit, not necessarily be consecutive. So since the taxpayer did not return to Malaysia after 14 days period ended, therefore Section 7 1B subsection 3 are not applicable. Next, employment income section 4B. So, employment is which the relationship of master and servant subsists any appointment or office, whether public or not, and whether or not that relationship subsists for which remuneration is payable. So, next is employer. Employee is the person who pays remuneration to an employee who has the employment. So next is employee, holder of appointment or office. So as you can see here, there are few cases related to Employment Act. So first is Edwards versus Clinch. So this case, the issue of this case is whether the fees paid to Mr. Clinch were chargeable to tax under Schedule E as emoluments of an office or chargeable under Schedule D. So the facts of this case is Mr. Clinch was a chartered civil engineer. He was one of a panel of some 60 persons whom the Department of Environment invited from time to time to act as an inspector to hold public local inquiries in respect of matters for which the Secretary of State for the Environment was responsible. So a department official would inform him of the location and date of an inquiry and also the daily fee payable, and they would invite him to undertake it. So Mr. Clinch had the complete discretion to accept or refuse the invitation. So the holding of this case was Mr. Clinch clearly did not hold an office here. So next case would be Great Western Railway Co. versus Better, which is about the definition of office. And next is Macmillan versus Guest. where an individual is a director of an English public company, but he does not exercise any of his functions as a director within the UK. So he was nonetheless held to be holding a public office. Next, tax law cases. I have inserted three cases, which is CD versus Comptroller of Income Tax, where the issue is whether a remuneration payable to a trustee under a will was subject to a payment of income tax. So the facts here is the taxpayer had been appointed as an executor and trustee of a deceased estate and entitled to receive remuneration as trustee under the deceased will. He had been assessed for income tax in respect of the remuneration which he had received for each year after coming into force of the income tax ordinance. So he had appealed against such assessment by the Comptroller of Income Tax to the Board of Review. So the Board of Review dismissed his appeal, and then he appealed to the High Court, where the appeal was dismissed. So the next cases is, as you can see here, ex-trustee of the estate of Y versus Comptroller of Income Tax, and also a rear taxpayer. Okay, next we would see employment under Section 4B versus self-employed Section 4A. So employment contract of service versus contract for service rests entirely on its own circumstances, where no single conclusive test. So the case here can be Hall versus Lorimer. So this case is related to the status of a worker as employed or self-employed. So it took the view that an employment contract requires regard to be had the extent to which the worker is in business on their own account. So because Mr. Lorimer took a business-like attitude to find new clients, he was held to be running a self-employed business and not working in a succession of short-term employments. So the facts of this is Mr. Lorimer received 32,875 pounds for his employment and also incurred expenses of 9,250 pounds. So basically he was a television technician working for 20 separate companies on a short-term job. So it was held that he was self-employed and could therefore set his expenses off against his income. Alright, so next part is the guiding principle. So it comprises of five main things, which is first control, the control of an employer on employee. So they can order, means the employer order what to be done and how it should be done to the employee, and the employee also cannot work for other person during the required work period. So the example case here is Colin versus Hertfordshire Country Council and another. Next is main characteristic underlying the transaction, which is the characteristic test. So the case here is Market Investigation Limited versus Minister of Social Security 1969. So the issue here is um, whether whether extent and degree of control exercised by the company over the woman qualified her as an employed person under a contract of service for the purposes of National Insurance Act 1965. So the fact of this case is a woman was engaged by a market research company to act as an interviewer on a part-time basis. So for each particular survey, she would conduct interviews in exchange for payment. She was required to work for a certain number of days at time during each occasion, follow a comprehensive interviews guide and comply with other contractual terms. So it was held that the woman was an employee of the company under a contract of service. So next is substitution of staff. YGL versus Director General of Inland Revenue is the example case of the substitution of staff. And next would be contract of engagement. The relevant case is S. Sandrian Berhad versus Director of Inland Revenue. Next would be nature of remuneration and benefits, and also sharing of financial risk and success. So that's all from me. Now I'll pass the presentation to the next presenter.
Okay, hello everyone. My name is Aina Adiba Binti Zulhizzam, metric number 265011. Now I will continue the second part of employment income, which is profession or employment. Profession versus employment. For profession, it is not defined in Income Tax Act 1967, while for employment, it is defined in Section 2 of Income Tax Act, which is employment in which the relationship of master, which is the employer, and servant, which is employee, subsists. It is any appointment or office, whether public or not, and whether or not that relationship subsists, for which remuneration is payable. For profession, it is defined according to Cambridge Dictionary. It is any type of work that needs special training or particular skill, and profession is often be respected because it involves a high level of education. For tax treatment, if someone involved in business profession, the tax treatment is Section 4A, while for employment, the tax treatment is Section 4B. Okay, next is the gross income from employment, Section 131A, Income Tax Act 1967. In Section 13 of Income Tax Act, it explains that gross income of an employee is in respect of gains or profits from employment includes any wages, salary, remuneration, leave pay, fee, commissions, bonus, gratuity, perquisite, or allowance, whether in money or otherwise, in respect of having or exercising the employment. It explains that gross income that is convertible to money, gross income under employment must be taken at gross amount. Next is 5 issues that we found in this section, which is having or exercising, issue of shares at par value, share options, gifts and testimonial payments, and lastly, payments for commencing employment. The first issue, which is having or exercising, the case that we found is Macmillan versus Guest. The fact of this case is the appellant was a director of a private limited company incorporated under the Company Acts in United Kingdom. He then be appointed as a general manager of an associated company in America, and thenceforward he resided there. The court held that as a director of the British company, the appellant held a public office within the United Kingdom in the Schedule E and was accordingly assembled to income tax in United Kingdom in respect of his director remuneration from that company. This means that even though the appellant does not reside in the UK, but he has a public office in the UK, so he is accessible to the income tax of United Kingdom. The next issue, which is issue of shares at par value. The case that we found is Salmon versus Wade. The fact of this issue is the respondent was a managing director of a limited company and entitled for applying for certain unissued shares in the company at their par value, which is lower than the market value. Then the respondent was assessed by the income tax under Schedule E on the basis of difference between market value of shares and the par value of shares. The respondent claimed that he did not receive any profit from the shares that he owned because he only bought it at the par value. The court held that it was accessible to income tax as a profit of his office as a managing director, even though he did not receive the profit. The court held that the profit was still accessible to the Income Tax Act because in UK it was assessed under Schedule E of the basis of difference between market value and par value. So the profit was still accessible to the income tax in UK. That's all from me. Now I will pass to the next presenter.
Assalamualaikum and a very good day everyone. My name is Nur Nasyitah Binti Mohd Yusoff, matric number 264469. Now I will continue the presentation to discuss on the issue of share options, gift and testimonial payment, and payment for commencing employment. To make it more understandable, I will explain through cases. The efficacy of share option scheme was tested in the case of Edward versus Binti. For this case, the House of Lords had to consider two assessments to income tax for different years of assessment. The first assessment was for the year in which the taxpayer received the options. The decisions regarding this assessment was that the taxpayer did receive an emolument for that year of assessment, but he obtained no benefit from it at that time. This is because the option was to buy at the market value. The second assessment was for the year in which the taxpayer exercised the options. The House of Lords held that the advantage that arose was not a prerequisite of profit from employment during the year of assessment. Instead, it was an advantage in which accrued to the taxpayer as the holder of a legal right that he acquired in an earlier year. To counteract the effects of the decisions in Edward versus Binti, legislation was enacted as Section 25 of Finance Act 1966, which imposed a charge to income tax when the option was exercised. The legislation was later reenacted and eventually became Section 135 to 140 of Income and Corporation Tax Act 1988. Now we move to the issue of gift and testimonial payment. I will start with the issue of gift first and followed by issue on testimonial payment. Issue on whether profits of employment or gift was tested in the case of Reed versus Seymour, where a county cricket club designed a match as a benefit match for one of its players. The net proceeds were invested on the player's behalf and later paid to him. The player was assessed to tax, and the case was finally decided in the House of Lords, holding that it was not a remuneration for service but a personal gift. Next, the case of Moore versus Griffiths, where dealing with the payment to members of the 1966 World Cup squad, the payments being held to be not taxable because they had the quality of testimonial rather than the quality of remunerations for service rendered. The last issue is on payment for commencing employment. We can see from the case of Gerald versus Bostic. The case was concerned with the taxations of a fee paid to an amateur sportsman for turning professional. The special commissioners held that this was not remunerations in advance, but an inducement for the taxpayer to put himself in the positions in which he could be employed as a professional by relinquishing his amateur status, and accordingly was not accessible to income tax. So here is the list of cases. You guys can have a look at it. That's all from me. Now I will pass to the next presenter. Thank you.
In Section 13, Subsection 2 and 3 stated that employment income is deemed derived from Malaysia, while in Section 13.2a stated that employment income is deemed derived from Malaysia if the employment income is exercised in Malaysia. In the following subsection, which is Section 13.2b, stated that leave attributable to exercise of employment in Malaysia will also be deemed to be derived from Malaysia. Then, Section 13, Subsection 2c stated that performs outside Malaysia but incidental to employment in Malaysia also recognized as employment income deemed to be derived from Malaysia. Here we have cases which is GBH versus Ketua Pengarah Hasil Dalam Negeri, where Mr. Yamaha, who is the taxpayer, arrived in Malaysia and received salary in Malaysia for 35,000 ringgit. And then the issue is whether the salary that received by Mr. Yamaha are subject to Malaysian tax or not. And then the court held that yes, it have to be subject to Malaysian tax because it is derived from Malaysia. In the following subsection, which is section 13, subsection 2D, stated that employment income that received by director of resident company also deemed to be derived from Malaysia. And then section 13, subsection 2E stated that aboard a ship or aircraft operated by Malaysian resident also classified as employment income deemed to be derived from Malaysia. Once employment income is established to be derived from Malaysia, such employment income will be taxed notwithstanding that the employer is not in Malaysia, the employee is non-resident, the payment of salary is made outside Malaysia, and the employment income is not received in Malaysia. Now I will explain more what DIM means. In case Saint Albin versus AG, the Lord stated that DIM sometimes used to put beyond doubt a particular construction that might otherwise be uncertain. And DIM also sometimes used to give a comprehensive description that includes what is obvious or what is uncertain. Cases that we can relate is Parker versus Catman, where the issue is the commission is to be treated as paid or whether it is not for the purpose of Schedule E of the Income Tax Act. And then the court held that commission was a sum paid to the taxpayer personally for his commission, and it must suffer for allocate of tax accordingly. And then the other cases that we can relate is DYC versus KPHDN. Now, for the next part, I will pass to Izyan.
Hi, my name is Nur Ammatullah binti Omar Bakhi, matric number 26445. I will present about exemption in employment income, Schedule 6, paragraph 21 and 22. Okay, for paragraph 21, okay, employment income of non-resident individual is exempted if there is three conditions, which is first, for a period which together do not exceed 60 days in the basis year for a year of assessment. Second, for a continuous period not exceeding 60 days which overlaps the basis years for 2 successive years of assessment. Or third, for a continuous period not exceeding 60 days which overlaps the basis years for 2 successive years of assessment, and for a period or period which together with that continuous period do not exceed 60 days. Paragraph 21 shall not apply to the income of an individual from an employment if the individual has income derived from Malaysia from their employment for a period or period amounting in all to more than 60 days in the basis year referred to in that paragraph, or in the period consisting of the basis year. Okay. Second, if the income is income from an employment exercised by a public entertainer and no part of the income is paid out of the public funds of the government of a country outside Malaysia. That's all from me. Thank you. I will pass to next presenter.
Adjusted income is gross employment income minus allowable expenses. For allowable expenses, we can define in section 33, subsection 1, where expenditures wholly and exclusively incurred during that period and in the production of such gross income. Second point is not for disbursement or expenses that not wholly and exclusively laid out for the purpose of production income, and it also not private or domestic expenditure, and allowable expenses also not for a scheme which is not approved. Cases that we can relate is Newsome versus Robertson, while the taxpayer claimed a deduction for income tax purpose in respect of the expenses incurred in travelling between his home and his chambers. So the decision is the travelling expenses were not incurred wholly and exclusively for the purpose of the profession. So taxpayer can't deduct it from the invested income. And then the second cases that we can relate is Blackwell versus Mills, where the taxpayer doctor had claimed against her income tax the cost of attending training courses required under her employment contract and for professional development. The decision said that the expenses also were not incurred in the performance of the duties of the respondent's employment and that the deduction claim was inadmissible. That's all from us. Thank you.